Thank you for joining the Woodson Center's Leadership Network Exchange, dedicated to supporting your efforts in transforming your local community from the inside out. From Washington, D.C., now introducing President, Founder, and your host, Robert L. Woodson.
We just want to welcome you, and we want again be delighted that you're joining us for another session. That the Woodson Center's mission is to provide training and guidance to community-based leaders who are in the trenches solving the problems facing our inner cities and in rural communities as well. We want to discuss today the March for Our Lives. Do today's youth feel ignored? This was certainly brought to home by the massive number of young people that were responding and came to Washington to raise their voice against the onslaught of violence, particularly shootings in Parkland School in Florida, and many other kids in the inner cities. I sent you an article from the Nation and World that says that Black teens feel ignored. That why is it that there's only a public outcry when there's a mass shooting of kids in suburban communities? But as some of the Black teens in the article say that this is a daily occurrence in Black communities every day. And so the question is, what are the solutions to this problem? Certainly young people who marched in Washington demanding that Congress take steps to change our gun laws, and there are other issues that they are raising about why, and it's fine, and I believe it's important, and I'm delighted to see young people fired up and coming down to raise objections about our policies. But what I hope to accomplish in the brief time that we're together to say to those young people, it's fine to do that, but I also think it's a twofold problem. There are two dimensions to any kind of problem. One is external. That is the challenges that we face in life. It's about 10% of our life is defined by external things, whether or not guns are in our community, whether we were born into a family that is troubled. Many kids were born to abusive parents, fathers in jail, mothers strung out. The neighborhood that you live in has just been violent plague. Like this young teenager in Baltimore who witnessed 7 of her friends killed in the course of 2 years. These are all very difficult external circumstances. And we must take steps to address them. But it is important to understand that only 10% of our lives are defined by external challenges that we face. 90% of our life is defined by what our reaction is to the 10%. So that we must have an external strategy, and the marches coming down to Washington, D.C., demonstrating, going to City Hall, going to the state houses, making demands on policymakers to change gun laws and other laws that may be factors contributing to the chaos that's going on in the city. But once we get off the bus and we get back home and we've laid our problems at the feet of policymakers, our responsibilities do not end there. When we get home, we have got to address what are the challenges within the youth culture themselves that they can begin to address some of the problems. The Woodson Center has for many, many years been involved in working with Andrew Wood and Brother Carl Hodrick. Brother Carl and I go back 40 years. And Carl is a man who has specialized in helping young people deal with the enemy within, the challenges that within. And so therefore, Hartford CARE Executive Director Andrew Woods will discuss the process of engaging 39 youth in the March for Our Lives who protest in Washington. So we get an idea from him as to the external challenges and how they were dealing with those external challenges. But again, we can't stop there. So we're going to pivot right after Andrew talks to what the young people can do themselves in their own community. Then we want to show you a brief video that really brings home some examples of how young people have successfully stopped the violence in their community. And so I would ask Andrew if he would just sort of share with us your experience and what happened with your 39 young people.
Well, sure. Thank you, Bob, for inviting me to share a few words on what the experience is like. As you know, the Woodson Center has been a long-term supporter of our efforts here in Hartford. And several months ago, with financial support from the Woodson Center, we were able to convene and start training young people to actually look at doing the research behind the issues of education, poverty, violence, and trauma, and basically teaching them how to examine these issues and then come up with public policy and funding recommendations to examine them. And so over the last 24 Saturdays from 10 to 2 p.m., our young people have been engaged in doing that research and then generated a youth report by which that report now takes a look at the data and then takes a look at what practical solutions they believe based on the data and information, which means key informant interviews, surveying their peers.
We lose him? We had a little interruption. But Andrew was, okay? Can you talk again? Can you say it again, Andrew? Go ahead, continue.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead,
okay,
we got you.
So basically, the research the young people have been examining over the last 24 weeks has now generated into a full report that right after the march, we went to City Hall with our young people and we presented our findings, which included public policy and program recommendations to address the issues around poverty, education, trauma, and violence. But what happened was when Parkland happened, it was unlike, we had Newtown, we had all the other mass shootings across the nation, but one consistent theme that our young people raised is that though we have these mass shootings, we have the day-to-day urban gun violence that takes place in streets like Hartford, Chicago, Baltimore, and Washington across the nation, that oftentimes we seem to ignore those voices, but even more so, not just the voices, but the real energy and the complex thinking that our young people lend to solving some of these problems themselves. And that's the kind of work that the Woodson Center has been able to support us in generating when we, led to our involvement with the march, as well as our continued effort to influence policymakers and others to pay attention to what young people have to say in addressing these issues.
That's great. What really bothers me personally as I look at around the country and look at the responses, Andrew and others, they ignore what you all are doing and the solutions that you have come up with. They're talking about spending $240 million on police resource officers. They're talking about millions increasing security, police security, when in fact there was armed police officers at the site of most of these shootings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As opposed to looking at solutions coming from your young people and how do we begin to shift the resources so we develop an internal strategy. As I said in the report, there was a Justice Department survey that after the 39 kids were killers, they asked to try to find out whether there was a common denominator, all these 39 youth killers after Columbine. They found that the kids had nothing in common, but what they did all have in common is that they told somebody what they were going to do before they did it. And so young people do talk to other young people, and yet we are not tuned into that channel, Andrew.
That's correct.
Mr. Diggs has the same thing going on in Buffalo. Would you comment on it? Mr. Diggs?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay, yeah, that was a good point he made. Same thing here going on in Buffalo. We've had several senseless shootings in the streets. I'm working with some young people in the leadership. I've been working with them for about 8 weeks now, and I have 2 more weeks to work with them. And so I polled them through a group chat and asked them the question, did they feel like they were being ignored? And they agreed with one young lady who said, not so much ignored, but more neglected. All right. And they were saying that the older generation does not understand where the younger generation is coming from and doesn't take time to try to figure it out. So you were right. You know, they are talking to us. We're not listening to them like we should be. And you were right when you mentioned one of the reasons they don't ask us about what's going on is because what we do on a daily basis, it's working. You know, we're keeping kids, we're talking to kids, we're listening to kids, we're working with kids. And
that's what I said. Give me avocado.
Go ahead.
That wasn't me.
No, I know it. Keep going.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we're working with them. I mean, we deal with this stuff every day. You know, one of the things I incorporate in all my leadership training is conflict resolution, letting them know that, you know, there's multiple ways to handle a conflict other than let's just take it to right straight to violence. But you have to be taught those skills in order to use those skills.
Well, those are what you were just talking about is exactly gets to me a second part of this, and that is what can we do internally to address the challenges that we face? That is an excellent point. As I said, young people do tell other young people. And in fact, our Violence Free Zone program was based on exclusively on mobilizing the leadership in young people among them and give them a voice. You know, this is the 50th anniversary of the death of Dr. King. I was a civil rights leader in my town of Westchester when Dr. King was killed, and I was 5 miles away when I was called back. And as I drove back to Westchester, Pennsylvania, I could see the flames and the smoke coming from the fires that were being set. The first thing I did was when I arrived in town, I went on the streets to 8 young men that I knew had influence. They were not civil rights leaders. These were grassroots leaders. One man, Eugene Newsom, was a 19-year-old teenager who had enormous street creds and all over. So I recruited Newman and these 8 other men, and we actually went and interposed ourselves between the National Guard and the police and the young people, asking them to be peaceful and they pull back. As a consequence of our intervention, not one life was lost, no one was shot, the police were not hurt, nor were any of the young people. And we realized at that time that the civil rights movement was not representing the people in those communities. And so the next day, to word of mouth, we summoned people to the community center in the middle of the Black community. 500 people showed up at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then we were able to, and they said, well, Bob Woodson, you should be in charge. I said, no, I'm the convener. I was the catalyst. You are the leaders. So I will help you. I will be an assistant to you. So they identified and listened and identified the demands from low-income Black people. And then we presented them to the city. But the leadership that stopped the violence were the people that you don't see on television or read about in the newspapers, but they are the people who are respected and trusted by people in the community, and they have enormous influence over the behavior, attitudes, and values of people in these communities. And so I have been committed ever since, based upon the evidence of experiences like this, that people like you all who are on this broadcast, you have the solutions. All you need are the resources, and in order to expand on the influence that you have in your cities. And you are the seeds of a national movement to address this problem. And so I'm pleased that we can meet like this and share with one another our strategies. I'd like your response. And afterwards, I want to show you at least a video that we have over the last 20 years, based upon the experiences of grassroots leaders. We have actually formalized a conflict resolution model that has reduced violence all over in certain cities, and we want to share that with you. So you can be inspired as we are inspired in listening to you. Any other comments or questions you may have? Curtis, you want to cue that up? We want you to take a few minutes to watch this video from our experience in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
We had like 3-4 fights every day.
Last year, my attitude was just like, could nobody tell me nothing.
Before I started this program, like bad, my grades were like low and all that stuff.
All last year, it was fights. People going to jail. All that.
I used to be like out of control, always had bad grades, and just didn't care, just cuss all the time. But now I know how to control better because of the program. I know how to handle my problems better and control my swearing and control my attitude and stuff.
There was a lot of problems or whatever, like early, it was hard for us to like let things slide or whatever, but then they started talking to us and trying to do mediation and things like that. And well, it helps us out.
In my years here, we've had shootings out front. We've had, kids shot. We've had fights. We've had almost riots.
That's the voice of the principal.
Situations that were going on with sometimes our students and people in the community who are not our students, people driving around in cars. For the violence-free zone people, the
Director of Safety and Security for the school system in Milwaukee.
Our staff by doing some things that we're not trained to do. They address some of our high-risk kids. Mentoring is probably the term that comes to mind when I watch them in action. Big brother kind of thing, talking to kids who have trouble. They've been around a little bit. They've got some experiences in life, and I think the kids respect that.
It's the conflicts in the hallway and the tension in the school is what kills your learning. That's the bullseye of what they're addressing. So for me, it was a no-brainer.
The Center for Neighborhood Enterprises Community-Based Violence-Free Zone Initiative is reducing youth violence, school disruptions, and suspensions in public schools around the country. CNE partners with community-based organizations like the Latino Community Center and the Running Rebels Community Organization in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
I think coming from the community, it has an asset. Because I think they have a better understanding, a deeper understanding.
Superintendent of the Milwaukee school system.
Saw themselves in those same situations and were able to relate to the children on a personal basis. Hey, I know I experienced it. I know what you're doing. I can tell you my own personal experience in life and what I did to work my way out of it.
The local organizations select, screen, train, and employ young adults from the affected neighborhoods who work in the schools as youth advisors. Because they have faced many of the same challenges as the students, they earn their trust and can motivate them to change their behavior. The youth advisors work in the schools and communities as monitors, mediators, character coaches, and moral mentors. They inspire students to good behavior and educational excellence.
When I was a struggling teenager, coming to the same school, South Division, it was
Violence-free zone youth advisor.
I was trying to find my way. I was trying to find that person that I could connect to in the school, and I never found it. Now I'm back, and I'm in the same school that I came from, And I am walking around here trying to be that person that I was looking for to most of these kids that are looking for help.
What we try to do is sit down with them, let them know, hey, you are important. And when we get to them to understand they are important, what happens is that they can sense a sense of urgency on the inside. Hey, I can do this, and
I take great pride out of watching the small victories that the children that we work with accomplish every day. I mean, whether it's going from a D to a C, you know, or just not getting suspended for 1 week.
Anytime I have an opportunity to help another person, I think that what gets me out of bed each morning.
The Running Rebels, they break it down like, yeah, I done did this before. I've been
The voice
in
of a
the same
student.
situation, and like from being a young man, like me, I'm like thinking like he's been through that, like so he know what he's talking about.
They try to realize what is good for you. So every time you come here and talk to them, it's like you're with your parents.
they keep it real. They ain't like no okay. They just keep it real. They lead them around the bush. They just get right on the track.
They tell you wrong, you right. They tell you right.
Instead of getting like two people that was getting ready to like fight, Running Rebels, make them come in the room and like talk it out and try to get down to the problem.
Last year, I wasn't doing so good in class and stuff. And then when I came here, I had the Running Rebels help me out, with my work and stuff. And they talked to me, told me to go to class on time, when to be there, come to school.
Before I got about activity, before I started coming to South, I stayed in jail all the time. Kept going back to jail when I came here. And they showed me some stuff, you know what I'm saying? I got my head on straight now. I got good grades, and they like family to me, really like a family.
C&E measures the impact on the students and the schools, and best practices are shared with the other violence-free zone sites in 27 schools around the country.
I went to one of the high schools, Custer High School.
Superintendent of the school system.
I went to talk to the staff about a reform that we're putting in place for educational purposes. The staff gave me a standing ovation. They thanked me for having the neighborhood enterprise program in the school. They said it has made a significant difference. I talked with the assistant principal. He says that their discipline has improved tremendously. He can't believe the number of suspensions that have been reduced. They used to have district office referrals for a significant behavior problem. They were having one a day, actually, those type of conferences. He said that he believes the numbers are about one every 2 weeks. So significant improvements from dedicated people in the community coming into our schools and having a passion to work with our children and actually make a difference in their life.
I can come talk to them, and I don't have to be scared to do anything.
Voices of the students.
Bring my anger out and show my anger. I can come and talk to and work my problems out. Came up with a 4.0, doing my work every day, going to class, staying on task. I came up with a 4.0.
Since I've been coming to y'all, I ain't been doing all the bad stuff that I used to do, as gossiping, fighting, just spending. Came here, I think I'm changing.
Last year, around this time, I probably would have been in the hallway, running from security or something, or trying to start a fight or something, instigating something. But since they came, you know what I'm saying, I'm like a whole different person now. I done been in class like every day this week, and I'm going every day next week.
They help me with the temper. My temper is like, I had like a real bad one. If anybody said anything to me, I was ready to fight, but the Running Rebels set me down and showed me a better way, like other than that. And I'm pretty sure every young man in here can say it's helping. The Running Rebels was here to make us a better man, to make us better men, and it's helping us a lot. Okay.
I just want to freeze it right now. We have Billy Stanfield, I believe, on the line. Billy is one of our outstanding violence-free zone leaders in Baltimore. Billy, is still there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm Billy, walking outside. I'm here. I didn't know you was going to call me.
I know. That's why I saw you walking out. I decided to.
Yeah, I'm outside now, so everybody can hear me. I was having a little lunch with the wifey, but I'm glad that I called in. The principles of the Woodson Center has really been embedded in me. Here in Baltimore, Freddie Gray's first cousin worked with us at New Vision Youth Services. And when we're talking about, marching and protest, you would mention about external and internal issues. That is so prevalent. And we must make sure that when we are protesting and marching, that we're considering all the circumstances and that we're doing it with a purpose. And because we can make a lot of noise, but don't accomplish anything. And so the points you made about the young people protesting and raising their concerns, we want them to do that. But they also, I believe, they need the wisdom of some of us who are older, been through some stuff, so that we will consider all the circumstances and that we're not just making a lot of noise saying nothing. Because in one aspect, Mr. Woodson, you know, I believe in the Second Amendment, and I do believe that there should be more responsible gun laws and reforms to it. But there's a reason why we have that Second Amendment as it relates to us being able to bear arms. And so the young people in their outrage, which they have a right to be outraged, and there needs to be better gun laws, they're really not considering all the circumstances if our Second Amendment rights were taken. Because I heard some of the protests and they were talking about doing away with the Second Amendment right. It's just kind of sort of that in Baltimore when the Freddie Gray thing arose. You had a lot of people making noise, a lot of people making promises, and they was taking advantage of the situation. And actually, Baltimore got worse after that. Now we're the #1 most dangerous city in America if you're talking about murders per capita. And so being in the schools, implementing the violence-free zone, and working with the young people, we have firsthand experience of, you know, how to change lives and how to help young people have a better vision despite what they have to go to home every day. And so I do believe that the principles that are represented on this poem, the success and experiences, is a model for the nation.
I
think
really,
the nation is serving.
good, Billy. I want to appreciate that. I wish we had a little more time today. But I think the point that Andrew and Billy and others are making is that, like I said, the takeaway for me is freedom is hard work. Protest is easy, but freedom is hard work. It means you got to sacrifice, you got to put in time. And so I'm just pleased that what the Woodson Center hopes to continue to promote is, yes, we encourage young people to speak out, stand up, but also we want you to look in and stand up so that we can begin to address the internal challenges. But many of the problems faced by our young people can be solved by the young people themselves. We must do, leaders like Andrew and Billy and others, give them the tools that they need so that the nation looks to our grassroots leaders for solutions and not externally to changing laws or guns or whatnot, you know? So we just really do this. I want you to also, it's important when we're talking about learning from people who are successful, all of you should always look for people who were down but who are now up. We should look for examples of success and not just people who have had trouble, but we need to read about people who were troubled but who now are living trouble-free lives. People like your local leader, learn more about Andrew Wood himself. He wasn't always this peaceful leader that you see. He had challenges in his teenage life. Billy Stanfield had challenges. Most of us had challenges. And I think we need to share with young people what we did to overcome those challenges and what they must do by example.
Mr. Woodson, you bring up a good point, and I would like to share a little short animated video that comes from Andrew's young people, but it was created with the help of one of our grassroots leaders, Joe Young, from Hartford, Connecticut. So I'm gonna show that now.
We've got a lot of talent in our communities, and Joe is an example.
The city of Hartford, as of November 11th, 2017, there have been 26 fatal shootings and 95 non-fatal shootings.
It's late at night, and everyone's crying. I'm confused at 8 years old. I barely knew what was going on. The doctor came out and told us that baby was dead. Everyone's crying. And I was traumatized by the look on my aunt's face. I never want to feel like that again. They said Ray was walking down Garden Street and was at the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm only 8, and this is happening. My world changed after Ray being shot. And we were here again at St. Francis. I can't take it. We should have never had to go through this. No one should. The last time this happened, Mr. Woods was here, helping us out, calming people down. Where is he? We need him. I hope he shows up. Something's got to give. Mr. Woods, where are you?
In the city itself, there have been 1,421 violent crimes, 5,471 property crimes. Recommendation number 1, end mass incarceration. Recommendation number 2, enhancing police responses to children exposed to violence. Recommendation number 3, support Hartford Crisis Response Team hospital-based violence intervention program. Recommendation number 4, improve the education system in Hartford. Recommendation number 5, increase job and entrepreneurial opportunities for individuals and families.
Andrew, I wish you would conclude this session by just sharing with us your thoughts about the young people and the video and everything. Andrew?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you just share what your thoughts on the video and what or anything else?
Sure. What happened was we wanted our young people not only to collect data and information and come up with the public policy and recommendations, but we wanted them to do fun and creative things with the data. And so that's when we brought in one of our local talents, who's a filmmaker and producer, and he worked with the young people and created some of the animation that you saw. And actually, we created a few of them because there's got to be multiple ways of, one, communicating this message to people, but also making it fun and interactive for young people to see their role and their place in communicating these issues, these complex issues, to a broader audience. And so that was just one example. I didn't know you guys were going to show that, so I do appreciate you putting it out there. But as you can see, those were real stats and they were real recommendations. But you opened up with, is anyone listening? And I'll tell you something that's real scary about this whole deal and very, very frustrating is that when it comes down to the voice of urban crime victims and young people, it's real continuously difficult for people to hear the voice of urban crime victims or people in our communities who are yelling from the highest of mountaintops. So we just need to keep pushing ahead and keep forging. And thank you again for your support.
Thank you. Now, I would just want to share just a couple takeaways from this broadcast. The first one is what Andrew just said, that we really must elevate the voices of those young people and insist that they be taken as seriously as some of the young people that you saw on national television. Oprah puts $500,000. Steven Spielberg puts $500,000 in the protests to get kids come here by buses. It would be nice if they could write some of those checks to people like our grassroots leaders so that they can begin to invest. So that's one of the takeaways. Also, the takeaway is that what you all have with those that research and the animations, there's so much creativity, there's so much energy, there's so much wisdom that are in these communities. And the Woodson Center is committed to not only to mining it, to go in and finding out what it is, but to also bring it to the attention of funders, policymakers, and people at the highest level so they can begin to look to people like you for solutions and make investments in people like you, as opposed to spending them on universities or spending them in police departments. And so that's what we hope to be able to report to you in the future. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time and sharing your experiences with us. I'm sure it's a benefit to all who's on this broadcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Woodson Center's broadcast on principles and practices of leadership. If you enjoyed this presentation, please subscribe, share, contact us directly, and follow us on social media. Together, we can transform our country from the inside out. For more information, visit our website at www.woodsoncenter.org. Share your feedback about today's broadcast with us on Facebook at www.woodsoncenter.org. facebook.com/Woodson Center, on Twitter @Woodson Center, or call 202-518-6500.